This whole episode will be a masterclass in how to decrypt a suspected code, using everything we've learned so far and tying together all the hints we've explored that have led us inevitably to the big question: to be or not to be the king. If Shakespeare's going to leave one final confirmation for us, proving what he wants us to know, it's got to be in Hamlet, the most autobiographical play of all. And what more significant place than in his dying words? The first clue that there's even a code involved is the first folio has 3 wrong page numbers surrounding the play. Starting at page 98, the end of Timon of Athens. The next is unnumbered, but should be 99. The next is a blank, 100, but 101 becomes 109. It carries on from there until the end of Macbeth, so that Hamlet starts at page 152. As we'll see, that's significant. The numbering continues fine, but then suddenly jumps by 100. And then it carries on again until we reach the end of Hamlet and another page 280. All that apparently so as to surround Hamlet's dying speech with 2 page 280s. Scratch those 2 zeros, they're really just half of Oxford's 4 O's cipher, and we'll soon see why he did that. Let's look at the speech. Oh, I die, Horatio. 0, 1. An immediate clue. The letters MOAI, that's the 12th night code that instructs us to revolve to become the Freemasons' sacred IAOM password. He's telling us to look for mirror imagery, which indeed is at the end of the first line, I-O. That's the I know no I from Richard II, page 40, where he's being forced to surrender his crown. Number 10, 10, is Robert Cecil's code number. By reversing it, Shakespeare is saying, if you're going to negate me, force me to give up my crown, I'm going to negate you. 10 becomes 01. At the end of the speech, a great line, the rest is silence, followed by that terrible line, O, but of course that's Oxford's code number 40, 4 O's. Again, page 40, second line, therefore no, for I resign to thee. By inverting his own 40 to 04, Oxford is revealing that this is also his own story. Dies again? A sly OOD clue, yes? We'll see. Die. He's saying this is a standoff. Take me down, Cecil. I'll take you down too. But as always, it goes deeper. It's a simple anagram, yed, but it says a lot. An archaic Middle English word that means a falsehood. And to burrow underground, to bury or dig. He's saying there's a lie here, but dig a little. Burrow underground, find what's been buried. Cecil is the real power behind the throne of the new King James, and Hamlet Oxford is setting the record straight. The wrong man is on the throne. Note that the Alpha-Omega system is used even here in this little paragraph. Beginning, a code. Ending, a code. Center. I will find where truth is hid. Lights is the center word of the speech. There are 28 words before it and 28 words after it. The wrong page numbers minus half of Oxford's cipher, 00. But why 28? Remember he's embedded 28 twice into the folio engraving. The 28th degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry is called the Night of the Sun. In 1581, at the Tilts at Whitehall, a jousting tournament, Oxford makes his entrance from a gold pavilion, clad in gold armour, seated on a gold caparisoned horse in front of a huge tree with every leaf, every branch, the whole trunk covered in gold leaf. His servants had decorated it overnight so that Oxford could emerge in the morning shining like the sun. He then delivers an oration to Elizabeth called The Night of the Tree of the Sun. In it, he expresses his undying devotion to her as her loyal knight, saying he would willingly die 1,000 times in her service to defend her crown. It's an unparalleled declaration of devotion delivered before the entire court and about 12,000 spectators in the cheap seats all along the tilt yard. He's either telling the world he and the Queen share the greatest love ever, or it's a declaration of utter selfless service, the perfect chivalry of a courtier for his prince. Oxford certainly embodies the medieval concept of the noble courtier knight. He immortalizes it not only in this oration, but years later in Sonnet 28, where the same motifs appear. He even embeds the Night of the Sun number into the sonnet's dedication. 28 words followed by 28 dots, and the TT key that unlocks the Enochian tables, an alternate version of the TH. The center phrase is the election lights on Fortinbras. Now, almost all versions of this monster 4-hour play are drastically cut down, so most people are unfamiliar with the character who actually has the final word, Fortinbras. He and Hamlet are virtually mirrors of each other. We hardly ever see Fortinbras. Hamlet is hardly ever off stage. Fortinbras has less than 200 words, Hamlet over 6,000. Fortinbras wins his kingdom, the very one that Hamlet loses. Since Shakespeare is so into using coded anagrams, you'd think the name Fortinbras might be a clue, and indeed it is. The name is not even Norwegian, Fortinbras's nationality. It's a completely fictional name created solely to guide us to the truth. A firstborn. Furthermore, the election lights on Fortinbras reveals light sun, or firstborn son of light. There's also a grammatical anomaly here that may be a clue. The election lights. Why TH apostrophe? It could just as easily scan correctly as the election lights, but he chooses the apostrophe. We'll see why in a moment. And then, what's this? It's blurry, so I checked several folios at higher resolutions, and it's in all of them. It looks mostly like a Hebrew vav, but it's definitely a specially created character. Finally, Dee's favorite device, the colon. He can use it as just one character, or if needed, as 2 dots to shift letters in a grid. Let's now examine the position of this special character to see if it's mathematically significant. There are 94 characters before it, and it's the 152nd character from the end. Well, 94 over 152 gives us 0.618, little phi, the golden ratio, one of the most important constants that D uses in countless codes. There's no way this vav is there by accident. So we dig and realize 152 is the page number Hamlet starts at, but only because of all that wrong page number juggling at the beginning. Plus, it's the cut-off point of the sonnet's pyramidion structure that marks the Great Pyramid's platform under the missing pyramidion. It's time to put this into a grid. If we don't use the vav, and we count D's colon as one character, the total's 245, which makes a lousy grid. Count it as 2 characters, 246, still no good. Count it as 2 dots and count the vav, 247, and now we're in business. It's obvious now that the vav is a code, and all D's codes must be revolved, so voila, a capital L. As usual, we will find where truth is hid, though it were hid indeed within the centre, which is about as perfect as could be. I, the self, unity consciousness, the goal D and De Vere are incessantly pointing us to. A line going straight up the centre reveals Vere, truth. A line going down the centre reveals De Vere, and of course the signature of the rosy cross, with the double T going through it, the key at the bottom of the sonnet's dedication. Of course, this cross with E.T. running through it is D's way of saying the Rosicrucian truth is eternal, the Aleph Tav of the reversed Hebrew alphabet cipher that started us on this whole journey in the first place. Moving up, we find C, the Roman numeral for 100, coupled with the center square, Roman numeral 1, confirming the very center pages of the folio, 100 and 101, where we will find truth is hid, Vere, and of course the Ore Ero. Even in the smallest possible device, just 6 letters, we find the Alpha Omega system, EO or RE-ER, to be or not to be the king. Clearly the I in the center is not part of a word, it's sacred, the self. It should remain here. Here's Fortinbras, a firstborn. And in the very center, that phrase, lights on Fortinbras. Note that for the phrase to be central, we can't use the on at the end of the line or the center I, but thanks to his ingenuity, another I and on precede the phrase. Light, sun, and still centered, but higher up, of. As we all know, the members of these societies ascend through successive levels or degrees of initiations, which they represent visually. It looks like he's building those ascending levels, doesn't it? And all of a sudden, you see it. A pyramidion. Highlight the letters we haven't used yet, and now we see why he chose the TH apostrophe. He needed that punctuation to have the solution make grammatical sense. And now we can use this I, leaving the center one untouched. I, comma, De Vere, comma. The TH stands out. I am that I am. And suddenly the divine Elizabeth makes her entrance. It's no longer all about De Vere. It was believed in medieval times and throughout the Renaissance that monarchs were chosen by God alone, the divine right of kings. Here D's using the TH to indicate the assumed divinity of Elizabeth. And we see he couldn't have achieved this without the use of that inverted vav. Shakespeare couldn't write news from England, L. It had to be a character that wouldn't ruin the sentence, but could be a letter when needed. And yes, I know it's only Elizabeth. We need an A. Well, here it is. The A of a firstborn. If we reassign it from here to make Elizabeth perfect, it turns a firstborn, suggesting there are many, into just firstborn, meaning there's only one. We're left with 2 statements, I am Elizabeth and I De Vere. Both are Rosicrucians, obviously. But who is this firstborn son of light? The answer must be in what sits atop this platform, the 152nd level of Shakespeare's Great Pyramid of Sonnets, the missing pyramidion with its all-seeing eye. We need to look at the Bath Sonnets and more deeply at the Night of the Tree of the Sun. I want you to picture it. The contestants are all preparing before dawn, determined to defeat this show-off poet-dramatist, nifty dancer and boastful raconteur who tells dirty jokes in several languages, a know-it-all who actually does know it all. But most infuriating, an excellent horseman, athlete and swordsman who won the tournament last time, but today, oh, today, all his enemies, the Green Knight, the Red Knight, the Blue, the Black, the White Knight, are gonna stick it to him once and for all. As the sun rises, They look eastward along the 650-foot tilt yard and see a huge bay tree, all shimmering gold. Out of the glare comes this dazzling horseman of the apocalypse, announcing, "I am the greatest," without having to say a word. He dispatches his page to deliver an oration to the Queen in the royal box. His words are so compelling, and the dramatic vision he's materialized so powerful. It's Shakespeare in the Park, centuries before that was a thing. A foretaste of what's to come that will soon make Elizabeth's court and the London playhouses the envy of Europe. His oratory starts by saying the world has countless varieties of trees. All have their particular uses and properties. All have their imperfections too. But he, a wandering knight in search of shade and rest, came across, I quote, "a tree so beautiful his eyes were dazzled with the brightness, for as the clear beams of the sun cause all the stars to lose their light, so the brightness of this golden tree eclipseth all others. The leaves of pure gold, the bark the same, the buds pearls, the sap nectar, the root so noble as it springeth from two turquoises, both so perfect, both equals." He chose turquoise deliberately. Warriors placed it on body armor and swords, for it was believed to make one invulnerable in battle. He is the turquoise, an in-joke not lost on Elizabeth, whose pet name for him was her Turk. He continues, "Vesta's birth sitteth in the midst." Vesta is the Roman goddess whose temple was guarded by the Vestal Virgins. "Whereat Cupid is ever drawing his bow, but dares not shoot, being amazed at the princely and perfect majesty." Of course, he's saying the Queen is this magnificent, unequaled tree of the sun. In finishing, he declares he will now prove himself in the upcoming contest, to only be the knight of the tree of the sun, and that whosoever wisheth to prove him wrong, let them come, for he would rather die upon the points of 1,000 lances than yield a jot in constant loyalty. Everyone is shocked, in awe. Surely the rest was silence, at least for one timeless moment. And then the contests began. No doubt his adversaries were more eager than ever to crush him for his insufferable boasting and overconfidence. What they could not see was this was not arrogance, nor self-delusion, nor even an inconceivably extravagant psych-out. This was a dramatic demonstration of a self-realized being. Oxford knew who he was, because he had fixed his heart on pure devotion to his goal, unwavering loyalty to truth. Clad in the armor of divine guidance and protection, he had no fear or doubt. He was indeed invulnerable. 12 contests of strength and valor later, Oxford had won every single one for Her Majesty. In ancient Rome, the Vestal Virgins had to vow 30 years of chastity to become priestesses of Vesta's temple. Their virginity was considered essential to Rome's survival. 2 years after Oxford's astounding demonstration and victory, this painting of Elizabeth was commissioned, portraying her as a Vestal Virgin. It's known as the Sieve portrait because she carries the symbol of Tuccia, a Vestal Virgin wrongfully accused of breaking her vow of chastity. Any lapse was punishable by being buried alive, but Tuccia proved her innocence by drawing water from the river Tiber in a sieve and bringing it back to the temple without a single drop spilling through the holes. She was reinstated to her rightful position of High Priestess of Vesta's temple. one of Rome's most religious centers of worship. Its altar was the sacred fire, and the Vestals were divinely obligated to keep it ever burning. If it went out, it had to be relit from an arbor felix, an auspicious tree, dedicated to the highest gods. Rome believed their very survival as a nation depended on it. I believe Oxford was saying he understood that England's survival depended just the same on Elizabeth's virginity. Politically, her availability to European suitors was the only thing that had kept the Spanish from invading so far. But they would be at Britain's shores soon enough. Oxford may not have liked it, for reasons we'll get to, but being reconciled to that truth, the young Shakespeare created that day a living altar of golden light to represent his queen, and offered lifelong service to her protection. Indeed, he spent the rest of his life dedicated to consecrating that promise through poetry and drama. Let us see how. The pyramidion at the pinnacle of this structure is represented by what are called the Bath Sonnets, 153 and 154. Both are derived from the same 6th century Greek epigram, but written in decidedly different tones. Each references cold, the moon goddess, Diana, nymphs that vowed chaste life to keep, these are the Vestal virgins, balanced by heat, the sun god, holy fire of love, the opposites that must be balanced to achieve unity consciousness, the alchemical wedding of heat, cold, light, dark, male, female. It's all here, but in a very nuanced way. 153 definitely has the more sexual heat associated with the sun god, whilst 154 tends toward the chastity of the moon goddess. The final line, love's fire heats water, water cools not love, is literally the sacred obligation of the Vestal virgins. The 4 occurrences of the word bath have long been assumed to be references to the Roman baths, and many scholars insist the poet's strange melodies of men diseased means he went to the baths to be cured of syphilis. Obviously the consequences of all those juicy dark lady sonnets. That's partly because we associate the latter stages of the Roman Empire with its decadence, but in the early stages of Rome's imperialism, they held deeply rooted spiritual beliefs. So when they stumbled upon the mineral springs at Bath, Somerset, they found the Celts there worshipping their goddess of medicine and healing, Sulis, as they had been doing for probably thousands of years. The conquerors named the spa Aquae Sulis, the waters of Sulis, a breadcrumb tossed to the vanquished Celts. You can keep her name. But overtly proclaiming ownership of this indigenous sacred site, they built an immense temple complex adjoining the baths, catering to the people's need for spiritual as well as physical healing. In the central courtyard was a sacrificial altar. Part of it still remains today. On one side of the courtyard is a temple dedicated to Sol, their sun god. On the other side is the temple of Luna, their moon goddess. And in the center is the most important temple of all, dedicated to a new hybrid deity, a totally Roman creation, Sulis Minerva. Minerva was Rome's most important goddess, born fully formed from the head of Jupiter, shaking a spear. Oxford's friend, Gabriel Harvey, in a speech at Cambridge University, honoured him by saying, "Thy countenance shakes a spear." So clearly many of his fellow writers and fellow initiates in the Rosy Cross fraternity understood the spear shaker metaphor he was weaving into his final sonnets. Witness this book published in 1612, Minerva Britannia, Britain's Minerva, the cover of which features the hand of a hidden author in the process of writing the letter I from behind a theatre curtain. Are we beginning to see the structural template he's built into the Bath Sonnets, with his own Minerva pen name at the centre, and Elizabeth as the Vestal Virgin Goddess. Cupid is Eros. Eros is the son of Venus. Diana is the moon. Artists were constantly comparing Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, to Diana. Here's a painting directly equating her with the goddess herself. This painting portrays the mythological beauty contest known as the Judgment of Paris, in which Venus traditionally was the victor over her rivals Minerva and Juno. But here, Elizabeth is depicted as winning the prize, an orb instead of an apple. The artist Hans Eworth, besides being a master painter and initiate of a secret guild, had a privileged position at court, designing sets and costumes for all Elizabeth's personal entertainments and plays. The painting's Latin inscription translates, in part, "The rosy face of Venus was shining bright, but then came Elizabeth and outshone them all." Notice how the artist has placed the queen atop 3 ascending levels, resembling the 3 main initiatory degrees of Freemasonry, above all the goddesses. This is clearly a nod from a fellow Rosy Cross initiate. By depicting Elizabeth above the rosy Venus, the painter is making a direct allusion to her being the mother of Eros, just as Oxford was in his Knight of the Tree of the Sun oration. Ben Jonson, a friend and great admirer of Oxford's and key producer of the first folio, wrote 2 masques, one entitled A Challenge at Tilt, and a sequel, The Tilting, in which 2 Cupids, Eros and Anti-Eros, are arguing in a conflict that escalates into a full-blown jousting contest. Their differences are eventually reconciled by the god Hymen, who explains, "You are both true Cupids, and both the sons of Venus by Mars, but this, the firstborn, was called Eros." He explains that Eros pined for a companion, so Venus birthed a brother named Anti-Eros, who is known as the god of reciprocal love. His purpose is to balance the mercurial Eros, the god of erotic sexual love, with a more refined love that transmutes the passions of the body into a selfless, loyal love based on mutual reciprocation. Is it a coincidence that Jonson used the tilt metaphor to explain the sacred truth behind the Eros-Anti-Eros myth? Or was he dropping crumbs in the forest to help us finally grasp the meaning behind Oxford's 2 Cupid sonnets, urging us to see that 153 speaks of erotic carnal longing, whereas 154 suggests more the selfless devotion Oxford offered in service to his queen at the tilts? Eros is generally recognized as the son of Venus, goddess of love, and Mercury, the god of speed. But later accounts say he's the son of Eris and Zephyrus, or that Nyx, goddess of night, birthed both Eros and Anteros. Still others say he was sired by Jupiter himself. But as Ben Jonson said so plainly, Eros is the firstborn. And since all the gods are in essence light, Cupid Eros is indeed the firstborn son of light. Nevertheless, despite solving the firstborn's identity, we still have just 3 statements with no sentence explaining or connecting them. There has to be more. Is it not striking that now we know the connection to the Cupid story, the visual of a pyramidion also resembles Cupid's arrow shooting skyward? But what is it pointing to? Of course, the crowns, and the central problem that both unites and divides De Vere and Elizabeth: to be or not to be the king. Is it possible the two versions of the Pyramidion sonnets are themselves the metaphor for their very solution? Does the conundrum of eros and eros, sexual love versus chivalric love, actually give us the solution we're looking for? Is there a revealing sentence hiding within these few carefully chosen words, crafted into the shape of a Pyramidion arrow? I believe so. There is a theory that the Queen and Oxford had an affair from 1572 to 74. During that time they paid 3 secretive and private visits to the Archbishop of Canterbury, the only person in the church permitted to marry the sovereign. In those days, a private betrothal ceremony with an exchange of rings, called handfasting, was as legally binding as a public church wedding. If a child was on the way, it's almost inevitable they would have needed to pledge their love this way in order to legalize their offspring, in preparation for the day when Elizabeth would eventually need to name a successor. Meanwhile, they both fully understood the political necessity of keeping the arrangement secret. As Oxford hinted in his oratory, England's security depended on her maintaining the illusion of virginal availability to her many prospective European suitors. There was simply no way their love affair could play out in public, and the child would have to be hidden away in a surrogate family, as happened frequently with Elizabeth's father, King Henry VIII. The little changeling boy in A Midsummer Night's Dream seems to tell precisely this sad story. First son born of the divine Elizabeth, and I, De Vere, the crown's Rosicrucian light. As any parent knows, one of the only ways to describe your child is the light of your life. Describing theirs as the crown's rosy cross light would be perfectly fitting and typically poetic, considering who's saying it. There is, however, another possible configuration of these same words. When Princess Elizabeth was only 14, she lived for a while in the home of the Dowager Queen Catherine Parr, King Henry VIII's widow, who had recently married Thomas Seymour, the handsome but reckless Lord Admiral. It's well documented that a scandal ensued, with suspicions that Seymour had been involved in inappropriate bedroom play with the young princess. The house servants reported many incidents, including buttocks slapping, kissing, cuddling, and even once Catherine, his wife, holding the princess down while Seymour cut her dress into 100 pieces. Quote. A scene in Taming of the Shrew clearly parodies this. Soon after, Catherine Parr died, days after childbirth, and Seymour was executed on 33 counts of treason, including efforts to manipulate his way into marriage with the young princess. There were rumors she had become pregnant, and that the child was placed into an aristocratic family's home, as had been the norm with her father's many bastard children. This simple rearrangement, therefore, is another perfectly credible solution for this code. I, De Vere, firstborn son of Elizabeth, I am the crown's Rosicrucian light. In this case, De Vere himself would be the light and hope of the crown, a legitimate successor to continue the Tudor dynasty, were it not for the same political restrictions that bound Elizabeth all her life from admitting she was anything other than virginal. In both these scenarios, De Vere would legitimately be king, the first by marriage to the Queen, the second by being her firstborn heir. Clearly, Oxford would not have gone to such lengths to illustrate the eros-anteros dichotomy, and with Dee to reveal it so sublimely in this masterful cryptographic work, if one of these two solutions were not the truth. To me, it's the attention to detail that's so convincing, because no matter what discipline you work in, perfection simply doesn't happen by accident. And it's John Dee's trademark. As he wrote in the dedication to his masterwork Monas Hieroglyphica in 1564. In it there be not even one superfluous dot, and not one dot wanting. Even the punctuation has to be perfect. I am, comma, Elizabeth, comma, the crowns, with the possessive apostrophe, Rosicrucian light, period, and of course for both of them, period. The question, to be or not to be the king, is, of course, rhetorical. It was answered definitively by the Queen's refusal right up to the moment of her passing to name an heir. But we need not despair of ever knowing the truth, for the answer awaits us right here, inside the Holy of Holies altar stone. All that's needed is for enough people to vote to open it, and the Church will have to do the right thing and reveal to the world what these great masters went to enormous lengths to hide for posterity, for you and me. So write to me, and let me know which of these two solutions you think is more likely. And please go to the website and vote your conscience. Yes, I want to know what Shakespeare left for posterity, or no, I'm not interested. Let's leave it another 400 years. In closing, I just want to say I understand there are those who'll dismiss this, and I understand why. It's because it seems impossible for anyone to have woven such a precise masterpiece of cryptography beneath a known outer masterpiece of literature. Plus, it's an unrecognized art. We've never seen anything like this before. But actually, these constructions, by definition, would be worked out in reverse. And seeing the end result laid out so clearly balanced like this, reflecting the balance within the final Bath sonnets themselves, you realize that all Dee had to do was start with the required end result, and then give the template to De Vere to craft the words of the speech around the coloured characters, the ones that can't be moved from their assigned places. And that actually gives quite a lot of leeway in the spaces surrounding the central message. Actually, about 70% of these letters are not required in the code part. And then Oxford, no doubt, would pass it back to Dee to give him the opportunity to add any final touches. Because, like all brilliant geniuses, no matter how anonymous their work is required to be, I guess Dee simply just couldn't resist signing it. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this double 007 episode. Thank you.